Hello, in this video I'm going to be looking at 3 mystery games involving fires. If you've seen any of my other videos in the past, you'll know that I usually heap a lot of praise on a couple, and usually one game comes in for a bit of a kicking, but in this case I'm actually very fond of all 3 of these games. The games we'll be looking at are a case from the Sherlock Files Curious Capers. It's a case called Propagation. This is a game played through a deck of cards. It's one I would recommend to play with a group. The other 2 games are essentially what you would refer to as case file games. One is a case written by a police officer. So this is from the Cold Case Investigation Unit series. It's case 3. It's called Who Killed Jenny? When I say case file, what you will be getting when you buy this game is whole lot of documents relating to a crime case that you will sort through and try to solve. The final game we'll be looking at is Fire in Adlerstein. So this one for me has a special place in my heart. It was actually the very first game I've played in this genre. As such, it does make it a little bit difficult for me to provide a completely balanced review, as I'm perhaps a little bit warped by my initial first impressions to the genre. I'll do my best to point out some negatives. I do try to review things from a perspective of how would other people also likely feel about this material and who this kind of material might be more suited to. Each of these games is essentially a one-time play. Once you've gone through and solved the case, you won't really have any incentive to return. Of course, you might have a quick look at a few different things to see if there was any extra evidence, or perhaps to look for some details you may have missed, but nothing will beat the first time of playing it. You won't be destroying any of the materials, so you could easily pass these on. If you're going to play Fire in Adlerstein or Who Killed Jenny, I would recommend setting aside an evening or an afternoon. That'll be all you need to complete that. According to the box, the Sherlock Files cases take about 1 hour to play. In my experience, they always take over 1 hour for me. It might just be that I'm a bit long-winded. In this case in particular, this was actually the longest time I've spent on a Sherlock Files case. It took about 2 hours, 10 minutes. I'll get more into why later on in the video. The premise of Fire in Adlerstein is that a businessman has died in a fire. A local journalist has been arrested as he was seen outside the house. The journalist has come to you for help. The police are saying he did it. It's up to you to figure out whether he did, and if not, who did it. I think the writer of Who Killed Jenny really had a good time killing Jenny. There's an interesting backstory to the actual writing of this case. The author of the first case in the Cold Case Investigation Unit series found out that one of her former co-workers essentially ripped off her first case and was passing it off as her own material, pirating it and selling it. As well as suing her, she also used this incident as some creative inspiration. In this case, the victim is somebody that really likes to rip people off. They have no sense of shame, no morals. Due to this, there's no shortage of suspects. This Sherlock Files case is set in a scientific lab. It all starts with a 911 call reporting a fire. This Sherlock Files series is a good one if you've got an active imagination. Here is a quick glance at the Fire in Adlerstein case file. You'll have a few pages of introductions and some materials that you'll record some of your findings on, and then you have the file itself. There's plenty of documents in here for you to have a look at. For me, the thing I really like about this Fire in Adlerstein game is I find that the evidence itself is very evocative. You don't get a lot of lengthy descriptions. There aren't extremely detailed witness statements, but you just get enough evidence to stimulate your imagination. I feel like the characters become real to some extent. The quality of the documents here are excellent. Everything looks very realistic. The flip side of that would be if you are someone that wants the more detailed, lengthy witness statements, diaries, those types of cases, you might be disappointed with this one. You might feel it's a little shallow. The Detective Stories company also produced Death in Antarctica, which is behind me. I felt that a difference between Death in Antarctica and Adlerstein was in Antarctica you have a longer journal entry. You might feel like you have a bit more depth from the Antarctica game. I personally didn't like the Antarctica game as much. I really liked Adlerstein, and I really liked their follow-up to Adlerstein, which was Still Lake, which is behind me now. That's just my personal preference. I found that the material was very evocative. It was very easy for me to imagine the type of world that was presented in this game, even from small amount of evidence and small amount of information that's available. Who Killed Jenny had some very good writing. One thing I particularly like about this game is its use of a Facebook page. I think this game probably had the best or second best in terms of what I've seen. It when you get to the Facebook page, there's multiple references, there's some funny things in the comment sections and things like that. The author, the former police officer that wrote this, she's managed to tell a few very interesting little stories in this game and come up with some interesting little twists and turns to the story. I have played the first 4 cases in this series. I think number 2 and number 3 are the best. Number 1 and number 4 had some things I liked about them. They also had quite a lot of things that I disliked about them, which is why I haven't put in an order for number 5. One obvious comparison to make between these two games, considering they're the same genre, the Cold Case Detective series, is the graphic design of the Adlerstein game is far superior to the Cold Case Investigation Unit series. If you have a look at the front page, a lot of the overall design issues, the fonts that they're using tend to be a little bit like harsh on first look compared to what you'll see in the Adlerstein game. Another issue I have with these Cold Case Investigation Unit games is there do tend to be a lot of document formatting issues. There tend to be a lot of typos. I think in the 4th game there was one character where the name was spelt 3 different ways at different stages of the game. I played both of the case file games on my own. I feel like the case file games themselves are better as solo games just because there's no clear structure as to what you're supposed to do if you play it with others. I feel like the mystery card game series like Sherlock Files or Suspects, you actually may benefit from playing them with others. That's why I played the Sherlock Files game with another player. Here's another side-by-side comparison of Adlerstein and Who Killed Jenny in how they're doing similar things. So this is the Adlerstein notebook. It looks small, but it looks like an actual notebook. This looks like what it is. It's a piece of card folded, and then they've added some things here that have like fake handwriting. It's obviously a printout, and it's been like folded and stapled in. Whereas the Adlerstein notebook, it looks like a physical notebook. It looks like the real deal. Everything's clearly typed or written in by hand. Certainly not typed. Who Killed Jenny features 3 crime scene photos. They're essentially all black and white pics. Fire in Adlerstein features 4 photos related to the case. Like I said, with these type of photos they're using, they're quite evocative. You see the pictures, you have like an instant feeling of what this character is like. And a good thing I like about the Adlerstein photos is a lot of them contain some small details that you won't notice perhaps the first time you go through them, are connected to other pieces of evidence. You also get nice family drawing. You also get some black and white as well as color photos from some CCTV camera footage. There are also a couple of pieces of evidence in here that you wouldn't usually expect to get in these cold case style of games. Usually you'd just expect to get photos and the rest would just be printed documents, and you might have some online material to look at. But here they've done a very sort of movie thing where you have the matchbook. These aren't real matches. Just from where you're sitting, they probably look like real matches, and you'll kind of notice there's one match missing here. And we get a Facebook page. So a little bit of an intriguing clue for you to pursue. I guess you've noticed by now that both games are using Facebook. It does have some issues. I feel like a few years ago when these games came out, Facebook was a bit more ubiquitous, but I feel like young people have moved away from Facebook these days. So I would say that's one negative of these games as far as their future playability, is that you're probably going to have to either already be on Facebook or go and give your details to Zuckerberg in order to rule out or confirm some suspicions. Having said that, they both do a really good job with their Facebook pages that are in the game. There's multiple things to look at. When it comes to the Facebook pages, Who Killed Jenny did have the superior pages. There was some really funny material on the Facebook pages in the comments section. So what is your opinion of having to do things like using ciphers to try to find out the meaning of encrypted text and things like this? Your answer to that question will probably tell you how you feel about Adlerstein in some way, and that in this passage here, you might notice we get this long line of incomprehensible text, and unlocking this information by being able to decode it using a cipher is going to be part of the game. Now, I will say that a good point about the Detective Stories games is if you do find there's something in the game that you don't want to spend your time on, like figuring out ciphers and things like that, they do have an excellent hint section on their website. It's very granular. It'll take you through the process slowly. If you're just looking for a hint to get you in the right direction, that's what you're going to get first. But as you go along, if you just want them to give you the answer, if you don't want to spend the time doing it, it's going to give that to you. So in my case, I started out doing the cipher. I think I did about 5 or 6 letters. I didn't actually go to their website. I think I ended up Googling the particular cipher and found a website. I could type in what was in the text, and I could type in the decoding key, and it would give me the solution. And then after that, I went to the website just to make sure everything was correct. If on hearing that, you're thinking, I don't want to spend any time doing something like that, the good news is that in Who Killed Jenny, no ciphers. You don't have to worry about this aspect of the game. But let me know how you do feel. I think someone left a comment on one of the videos recently asking about the cipher files, which I've not read, but if you are interested in ciphers, it would sound like it's a good one for you. But if you're not that interested in that aspect of the mystery, you want to be more focused on deductive logic, then it's probably not going to be something for you. But if deductive logic is what you're more interested in, I will still say that both games are going to leave you satisfied. There's lots to do within this Adlerstein case. When you look at the initial fire report, it will say time of fire unknown. However, there are ways within the game to determine the time of fire and determine a lot of things. The game does give you a lot of work to do in terms of not just ruling out suspects, but also you have to apply some deductive logic just to work out who certain people are in this case and why they may have motives. One thing I feel that the team behind Fire In Adlerstein does really well that a lot of other cold case games really miss out on is they put the effort into each character in the game to make it believable that they could be part of the final solution. In other games, certain characters do feel like throwaway characters. You feel like there's a certain story the author came up with and it involves like these 3 or 4 people, and then they brought in a couple more characters late in the writing stage just because they thought, we need a few more characters for the gamers to spend a bit of time thinking about. Because of this effort, each character in the game really feels like a strong suspect. Here is an example of one of my favorite characters in this game, Walter Sivers. We have an incident report in the month that the fire took place. The victim of the fire made a complaint to the police about Walter Sivers. they said that he threw a stone into the garage window of their house. Now here's more information. So this is a legal complaint filed by Walter Ciphers against the victim of the fire. In this letter, Walter complains that Joseph Bremer, who ends up being the victim of the fire, has renovated his house without the consent of his neighbors, and it's caused him to lose sunlight. His neighbor's renovation has affected his lifestyle. A lesser game would stop there, that we've got a motive and we've got some evidence of there being an issue. Fire in Adlerstein goes a step further. We also get a court document about a court case that took place 4 years earlier, and it is mentioned that Walter Ciphers set his neighbor's dog's house on fire because he didn't like the dog barking at night. For me, this document really turns Walter Ciphers from being one of those throwaway characters to being the type of person you can kind of relate to, not in the sense of like, yeah, I'm like that, but more in like, okay, I understand this guy is the type of person who has a lot of anger at his neighbors if they do things that upset him. He then becomes a more viable suspect in this case. On the other hand, Who Killed Jenny does fall for that trap of where it's kind of clear she has this story she wants to tell involving these characters. Then she's just realized, okay, I need to throw in a couple of people that can just be ruled out quickly. This is a minor spoiler for those who wish to play the case, so you could skip ahead to the next section. I always do put detailed chapter lists for all of these videos. The Who Killed Jenny case centers around a bar, nightclub that is owned by this woman named Jenny. This staff schedule is not from Jenny's bar or club, okay? Its presence, when it appears in the game initially, it comes as a little bit of a jolt, like, what is this document? Like, it's so disconnected from everything I've seen in this game. Everything so far has been kind of Jenny this, Jenny that. And then right towards the end of the game, we have some follow-up. We get a few pages of chat transcripts that are connected. During one of these chat transcripts, we get this. Again, small spoiler. A few people are having a conversation. I can't work for Jenny a minute longer. And then there's a response. Yes, 100%. Why don't we murder her? Then we can all take over and run the place like a proper business. Then someone responds, we could lay a trail of coins leading her off a cliff. She'd be so focused on the money, she'd walk right off it. Ha ha, yeah, or maybe just leading her into a wood chipper. For most people, seeing someone like that, this person's not really a strong suspect, so just having to go back to the schedule information from earlier and trying to see whether this person had the opportunity to commit the crime is a little bit of a boring task, even though it's a short one. So I do feel like that's one of the issues you'll come across in cold case games once you've played a few different ones. Some of the characters aren't that significant in the story, and just checking their alibi can be a very simple process. For me, in this example, we've got a set of very weak suspects, whereas Fire in Adlerstein, you have a set of very strong suspects. I also feel that Adlerstein does a better job in that it makes you work in order to clear a suspect. For each of the suspects, the amount of effort involved in ruling them out is a little bit more than what you would expect from a standard cold case game. Some people might actually not like that aspect. Some people might just prefer a clearer narrative. Like I mentioned before, the evidence here tends to be a more evocative. But I feel like having this process of having to make the effort in order to rule them out does give you the feeling that each person is important. Once you've cleared them, you're just narrowing down this pool of suspects until ultimately you can make a conclusion in this case. And this issue with suspects is not something that this company is always good with themselves. I feel like some of the characters in this Death in Antarctica game, their motivations for the crime are fairly weak. Their alibis are also like fairly easily checked. There's not a lot of effort gone into that side of the story. But if you do like that process you get in Adlerstein of having to make an effort in order to rule out people, I would recommend Still Lake. One thing I would say is don't play Still Lake until you've played Adlerstein. There are recurring characters that are in Adlerstein. If you've played Adlerstein, this won't be a problem for you, but if you just play Still Lake directly, you'll feel like one set of characters in particular are extremely underdeveloped. Whereas if you play this game, immediately you're like, oh, aha, those guys. I got it. I know them. Who Killed Jenny does have a lot of bonus content available. By bonus content, I mean material that you might not expect to see in one of these games. On the company's website, you can listen to a news report about the crime. There's the police phone call. It's a phone call from a police officer. There are witness statements recorded by a police officer from a body cam. On reflection, I didn't really find these pieces of information that important for the case. They do tend to just repeat things that are already in here. But I have to be honest, when I first found out about this company and was looking at this material, this kind of thing really did appeal to me. Between these two games, you probably have the feeling that I prefer Adlerstein. It's always hard for me to say just because Adlerstein was the first one I came across in this genre. And because of that, I have a lot of maybe emotional attachment and I maybe can't see the negatives that I would see if I picked it up brand new now after playing dozens of these games. Who Killed Jenny has a better ending than Fire in Adlerstein. It's not to say that the ending to Adlerstein wasn't good. I just have a preference for the Who Killed Jenny ending. And in mysteries, endings are important. So if you have played both of these games, please do give me your thoughts. Well, I think it's about time we talk about this Sherlock Files case. It's from the Curious Capers edition of the Sherlock Files. Each Sherlock Files game is independent of one another. There's 3 games in each of these boxes. None of the games are connected and you don't need to play any particular box before you play another. What is a Sherlock Files game? I talked about it more in my previous video. One thing I've done since the previous video is I've started playing this Deductive series of games. Deductive is often compared to the Sherlock Files. But one thing that really stands out to me about Deductive, particularly this game, The Gaze of the Ghost and The Nightmare in the Mirror, which is a game dealing with a kidnapping. Those games are presented in a sequential order. So there's a very clear narrative. There are things happening during the game that make you feel like you are part of the events. The Sherlock Files doesn't feel like that. When you have a Sherlock Files game, it feels like you're taking different parts of the story in random order and you're trying to process that and put it back together in a story that will solve the mystery. I've only ever played this game as a group game. If you play as a group, there is a heavy memory element to the game in that as you're going through the cards, you'll be deciding which cards to throw away and which cards to show to your partner. And at the end of the game, if you've shown cards to your partner that are not important in solving this overall mystery, you will be deducted some points. The large part of the game is memorizing things and making decisions about whether something is crucial information. There's certainly information that you'll go through in the game where you're like, okay, this must be important. This is huge. And then there'll be other information where you won't be sure of its relevance. So my previous experience with the Sherlock Files games is at the end of the game, you get 10 questions. Typically, I expect to get 8 or 9 questions out of 10 correct. I usually get 1 or 2 wrong because there was some minor detail, something I wasn't able to put together, but I kind of solve the big aspect, like the whodunit. This was not a usual experience of the Sherlock Files for me. This is by far the worst I've performed with any Sherlock Files case. For some people, having that experience might be seen as a negative, but I kind of like it when a game is able to give me a bit of a whipping. We did get stuck. There was one piece of evidence that my partner put down at the end of the game, and she said, I don't know what this means. What do you think it means? And then all of our discussions kind of centered around trying to come up for an explanation of what it meant. That's why this game took me 2 hours and 10 minutes. Eventually we went through the questions, and usually after we answer the questions, we open up and check our answers. But I said, like, we can't leave it here. We've got to have a look at the cards we've thrown away. There must be something that explains this. And I think at that point, our minds were just too exhausted. I would recommend taking a break, having a lie down if you have a nap during a mystery game. I think that's one of the reasons I like playing solo. If you do get tired, you can have a nap, come back, figure out where you've gone wrong and what you've missed. It may sound to you like this was a horrible experience, but for me, I kind of like this experience of being thoroughly beaten by a game. I actually would say this is probably my second favorite cases of the Sherlock Files that I've played. My favorite case is one called Among the Graves, which if I ever get around to finishing a missing persons themed mystery case video, that will be one of those reviewed. And I would say that overall, this Sherlock Files box has been pretty good so far. I've played Propagation, which is this fire-themed game, and I've played 13 Hostages. The next video I'll probably do on this channel will be a look at 13 Hostages. It'll be a video on jewel heist games, which will feature one of the games I didn't like so much from the Cold Case Investigation Unit. But I didn't just like this case because it kind of whipped me. Another key reason I like the case, when you get to the end story, it is quite a powerful, strong story. I do like evocative games, and when I really thought about this solution to the game, the story of what actually happened in this room, it's quite a powerful and strong story. If you're a TV producer and you're looking for like a good first episode of a show, I won't say what the show itself will be about, because that's going to give away too much of the story. I can't really say too much about this Sherlock Files game, but I feel like this case would make an excellent pilot episode to a TV show. So with all of these Sherlock Files games that I review, I can really only show the first card of the deck. It's a drawing, a map of the 4th floor. Most of this information here is extremely hard to read, but this particular specific information is not so important to the case. It's more of the layout of the lab itself. I will give you a reading of the introduction of the case. If you want to know more, you'll have to play it yourself. It's a recording of a phone call to 911 on Wednesday, July 12 at 10:10. We'll have 2 people. We've got the emergency and Mia. 911, what's your emergency? I'm calling from the Robsa lab. There's been a fire on the 4th floor. Are there people stuck inside? We don't know. We have 7 people here in the outside assembly area, but more could be inside. What's the size of the fire? Almost the whole 4th floor. Is there anything flammable or dangerous in the damaged area? It's a lab. Everything's flammable and there's very valuable equipment. I don't know how this could have happened. We take every precaution against fire. Anything that could cause an explosion? There are oxygen tanks on the 2nd floor. The fire must not have reached there yet. Do you work in the building? Yes, my name is Mia Dahl. The 7 of us here are all employees. The firefighters are on their way. Okay, so that's an introduction. You can't really get a sense of where the story's going just off of that. I did like the setting of the scientific lab. Having things set in a lab presents an opportunity for the writer to have fairly interesting threads that you can include in the story. If you're someone that likes the idea of a game in the lab, but maybe you don't like the Sherlock Files format, you prefer a cold case style game, I would recommend Murder at Mediluck Medicines. It's pretty challenging. It takes about 3 hours to play. I think it's one of the better cold case games in this genre. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Subscribe if you want to see more of these kinds of reviews.